starting to pick up again. I think people are starting to make some commitments and squeeze things in before the end of the financial year. But yeah, I mean, you have to hustle for every piece of business. I mean, who's your normal client? I mean, who normally makes a buying decision for your product or service?
It's normally SMEs because I'm in consulting.
Yep.
SMEs, those are my clients.
But
So they are
and who?
suffering as well.
So typically it's coming out of the kind of MD or whoever, like it's small single leader,
Small,
one of the doesn't go
uh,
through a procurement process.
no one-man business mainly.
Okay, cool,
Yeah.
cool. Jimmy, are we good to go? Sorry, I'm just cognizant of time here and people
Yeah,
that we're on
definitely.
time here.
I think we're good to go. Plus, we'll be recording the sessions. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. How's it, guys? Sorry for being a few minutes late, as everything just seems to be running into each other. So hopefully I can put some energy into this and hopefully you can learn a little bit out of the session. So, I mean, today we're going to talk a little bit about things like the DTIC grants and incentives and put in different words, how do you get something back from government? Whenever people think about these sessions, they often think about this idea that, if we get a grant from government, we're going to go and get free cash. They can fund my idea. I can arrive there with just an idea or a plan or a scheme, and then government will just throw some money at me. And while it might work in certain high-profile things that you've seen in the news, the general entrepreneur being able to go and apply for a government grant or incentive does not actually qualify for the things that they think they're going to qualify for. The idea of free money when you go get a DTIC grant. I think to what I was saying earlier, just to go and get a grant out of the NUIDA has taken nearly 9 months. And most people sit here and they think, well, I'm going to go get a grant and the grant will be paid out tomorrow and I'll just be able to then go and run my business. It'll pay me some salaries and I can kind of sit there and be an entrepreneur. And in reality, that doesn't happen. And a lot of these grants and incentives that you look at that come out of government actually don't cover salaries. So that's a very big consideration when you start looking at these things. Is you build your business plan and you say, okay, well, I'm going to go and apply for the Black Industrialist Grant, and I'm going to go and apply for 20 million rand, and it's going to fund salaries and all of those fine things. The reality is most grants don't actually cover salaries. They are deployed for very specific reasons. They could be, in the case of the Black Industrialist Fund, it could be for the purchase of or funding of equipment or funding of specific types of transaction. But the reality is that they don't actually fund your kind of day-to-day operational costs. They're used with the intent to capacitate certain parts of certain sectors and certain businesses. They normally require some form of owner's contribution, particularly when you're looking at the kind of bigger DTIC grants. So if you are going to apply for a 10 million rand grant, Black Industrialist Grant, for instance, they might expect either an owner's contribution or a matching contribution, and the contribution could be anywhere between 10 and 50%. So if you're applying for a 10 million rand grant, you'll be expected to contribute at least 5 million of it. Between 3 and 5 million of it. So think about that before you start building your business plan around the idea that I'm going to get some form of grant and that'll just get my business going. A lot of these incentives actually require some form of owner's contribution to do it. Again, I just touch on the time that it takes for a lot of these incentives to work. They take a lot of time to activate and get you up and running. So don't build your business case around the idea that I'm going to go and get a grant or an incentive out of the DTIC and assume that that's how you're going to go and build your business. I know this has been one of the kind of messages that Ken and Tyron have probably drilled home in the last couple of weeks. But this thing about actually having your documentation in order is incredibly important. I mean, if you go and look at going to apply for a loan from even CEDA, the documentation that they require for an absolute startup business is very significant. I mean, the checklist can be up to, yeah, I think there's like 15 to 20 items on there, and it's everything from your bank accounts through to tax compliance certificates, through to BE certificates. And a lot of entrepreneurs sit there and they're thinking, well, I'll worry about the compliance afterwards. Reality is you actually need to have a lot of these things built up front just to put you in a position to go and apply for these grants or incentives there. So think about that before you have this perception. Okay, well, DTIC's got money, Treasury's got money, CEDA's got money, NYDA's got money. All of these things are there, but it's not a case to go and build your business. They are nice to be able to catalyze or capitalize your business in certain elements, but it's not your core focus area. And I think you need to just be very aware of that before you start building a business plan that requires grants to put into your business. So, like one of these kind of perceptions is that government is actually bad when it comes to supporting small businesses. Reality is actually quite different. I mean, government is actually one of the biggest supporters of small businesses, particularly when it comes to putting them into preferential procurement, putting them into supply chains, letting new people go and actually apply for businesses. The problem that you often find is that a lot of people have so many overlapping or very similar services. So if your service is website design, for instance, and government puts out a tender or some form of activation inside of the community, you end up, everybody goes and applies for these, for a website tender, and then you end up, everyone's going to go on lowest possible costs, and you end up getting shot down. But one of the things that you can see that's actually starting to evolve quite nicely at the moment is the special economic zones. I mean, those who are familiar with kind of South Africa's history around these SEZs, they've gone through different kind of iterations and incentives that have been attached to them. But if you go and so SEZ stands for Special Economic Zone, and the intent behind a Special Economic Zone is to encourage kind of large corporates to come into a specific area. So in case of Atlantis, it's Atlantis in Cape Town, and they're doing like a green energy hub in their particular region. Saldanha, if you've been following me on social media or whatever, you'll probably see that drone project that I shared on LinkedIn. So Transnet have, for instance, Saldanha is very much a key economic port and point of trade for a lot of South Africa. And Saldanha has been identified as a special economic zone where the intent is to move a significant amount of logistics and freight through that area. So what the government's done is it's set up a special economic zone where the intent is, where organizations who set up there are often put in a given favorable tax rates. Maybe they don't need to pay rent for certain periods of time. They get favorable electricity rates, etc., etc. But if you go and have a look at these, go and just start doing some research around these special economic zones in your areas, and see where you've got the opportunity to actually go and see if there's opportunities to partner with them. A lot of these organizations, so Ford, for instance, have come into that Tswana area. It's actually a new SEZ that's come in. And they've had to commit a significant, I think it's somewhere between 3 and 6 billion rands worth of money to that particular special economic zone. And they're using it obviously for the manufacture of Ford motor vehicles, but they're encouraging organizations to come in, and they have to support the surrounding economy in terms of supporting a lot of those entrepreneurs in those regions. So try and make an effort to go and kind of identify what your nearest SEZs are and where the opportunity is to go and connect with them. And what you can often do, if you just go and Google SEZ, it'll pull up the DTIC site, and you can actually go and click through to each of the SEZs themselves. And each of them will have things like the upcoming tenders or opportunities to go and register for their supply chain or supplier databases. So that could be quite a nice opportunity to be able to find some new business or new opportunities there. The other thing that you need to try and do quite a lot of, and I'm going to touch on enterprise and supplier development next, but go and make an effort to get onto these supplier databases as well. And it'll tie in particularly to my next comments around the enterprise and supplier development. But SCNet and B123 are just two that I know of where you can go and actually register on a supplier database, and you can have the opportunity to go and fit into people's supply chain if you offer a specific product or service. There's others that you can go and do inside of your industry as well. There's construction databases. There are, say, a lot of those ones around the Innovation Hub there in Pretoria. There's a supplier database that you can connect to there as well. But the point is, you need to familiarize yourself with what opportunities are available as a supplier into these other supplier database opportunities. Are any of you guys using either of these databases at the moment? Are you registered on any of them? I'm assuming that's a no. So I can't see any chat just because I've got the screen, I've got a full screen on at the moment, but I'm going to assume that you guys are not on at the moment. But yeah, make an effort to go and identify these supplier databases. They do give you an opportunity to at least get your foot in the door and see what is happening in a particular area and go and build on them from there. So one of the best mechanisms for funding small businesses in South Africa, it doesn't come out of venture capital, it doesn't come out of CEDA, it doesn't come out of the IDC. Some of the best funding for a lot of small black-owned businesses in South Africa actually comes out of the enterprise and supplier development channels. And I mean, to give you an idea of kind of just opportunity in a lot of these spaces, we were just actually on a call with one of the big hospital groups in South Africa, and they have to spend 2 billion rand a year. Well, they have to spend 12 billion rand a year on certain types of procurement. And only at the moment, they can only procure about 2 billion of that inside of South Africa. But what's even scarier is almost of that, they can only get about, I think they said about 200 million rand is all they can get out of small black-owned suppliers that have the capacity to be able to go and supply these certain types of products and services that they've got to work on. So, I mean, for those who know the enterprise and supplier development history, the intent behind ESD was to find ways to capacitate small black-owned businesses in sectors, and an organization needs to take 1% of their net profit after tax and contribute it toward enterprise development, and 2% to supplier development. And I mean, there's different ways to go and chop that, but effectively there is a contribution that organizations have to contribute of their profits to bringing smaller black-owned businesses into their supply chain. And sorry, are any of you guys ESD beneficiaries at the moment or not? Yes, no?
No.
No? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So this is one of the best mechanisms for actually going and finding ways to, and this ties back to that previous slide that I had on where, so for instance, B123, they're a BE consultancy in South Africa. And what they do is they will go at a certain point. So what happens is BE gets measured to over a 12-month period, and organizations have to spend certain amounts on skills. They have to spend certain amounts on meeting ownership requirements. They need to spend certain amounts on the YES program, for instance. They need to spend money on enterprise and supply development, which is what we're talking about here. And we need to go and they need to spend time and money on SED, which is social and economic development, which is contributions toward developing young black youth in South Africa, or social enterprises in South Africa. So this has always been one of the mechanisms it's always been one of the best mechanisms for small black-owned businesses to be able to actually secure funding. And that funding can take a couple of different forms. So the first form that it could take is maybe let me break it down a little bit. There are three kind of high-level channels that you could look at. It's enterprise development, supplier development, preferential procurement, and then there's something called SED, which I'll touch on separately. But the idea behind enterprise development is, so say the organization has to spend 1% of their net profit after tax on enterprise development. And what they can do is they can make a contribution, a cash contribution, an equipment contribution to a black-owned organization that is an EME, which is what most of you guys will be. So it's exempt micro enterprise, and they can say that I'm doing this bit to develop a black-owned business in South Africa. And I always kind of encourage a lot of the smaller businesses to go and actually position themselves as enterprise development beneficiaries, that they can go and work and understand the space. So if you are in the field of, I mean, let's just use the bike story, for instance, because I can actually give you a very good example there. Michelin had to make an enterprise development contribution over the last financial year. And so what they did was they actually funded motorbikes. They funded a motorbike training academy, and so the skills program that goes with that. And they funded a track where these youth were going to go and be developed as motorcycle drivers. Effectively, they would become delivery drivers, which I think is a lot of what you're doing. And so one of the options is to go to an organization like Michelin and say, for me to capacitate my business, I need to be able to buy 2 bikes valued at, I don't know, let's just say 50,000 or 25,000 Rand each. And that'll be, I'm looking for an enterprise development contribution of 50,000 Rand from your organization. And Michelin says, okay, we can do this. We can either give it to you as cash, or or depending on what their procurement systems work like, they can say, I'll give this to you as cash, or I will buy the bikes on your behalf and donate them to you. So enterprise development becomes quite a nice tool for businesses to be able to capacitate. And if you pretty yourselves up nicely and you go to suppliers in your industry, the bigger players in your industry, everybody's looking for ways to make their enterprise development contributions, particularly around their financial year end. So working out where your major industry participants are and saying, let's go and actually, I want to be one of your enterprise development partners for the coming financial year, and this is the project that I would like to put together. Supply development is slightly different. So obviously, when you look at small businesses in South Africa, they reckon it takes 1,001 days before you become profitable. So what government and the DTI said was, it's all good and well to do enterprise development contributions, and I chuck some cash at a little business, and I say, there we go, I'm doing my bit to actually supply to get this business up and running. The reality is that those businesses can't actually survive if they don't have clients to be able to actually go and supply their goods and services to. So what they would then do, and I'll use the Michelin example again, is they will go and say, great, I funded these youth in year 1. I bought them their motorbikes. I did their skills development training, built their skills capacity up there. But now I want these youth to actually go and do some form of service or delivery for me. So I'm going to go and take these bike drivers that have now been set up as little business owners, and they are going to go and facilitate deliveries they'll do courier deliveries for us. And we're going to sign a long-term supply development agreement with them, which will say that we're going to take these 10 youth and get them up and running, and we will guarantee them a certain amount of work over the year to develop themselves as a particular supplier of this service to our business. Is everyone kind of comfortable with that? Have you got any questions about that? Can we brainstorm some ideas for you? I mean, what are the kind of the industries that you're in? I mean, where do you see, if you could get a kind of soft loan or interest-free loan or a grant from one of the suppliers? I mean, who do you think would be a good person or good type of organization to partner with?
For me, that Michelin, like the example that you just made, is is perfect. So I think I'll just go do more research on that and then maybe try and get in contact with them. But then for me, that one, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, the ones that were kind of jumping out for me would be the likes of Michelin, would be maybe Goodyear, Bridgestone, Tiger Wheel, and Tire. A lot of those that are kind of operating in your industries. Yamaha, Honda. I don't know who supplies your. I mean, what type of bikes do you buy for your service?
We're currently using big boy motorcycles, and
Okay.
there's only one seller, or yeah, there's SA Motorcycles. Yeah, they're
Okay.
the only suppliers in SA. They're the only company that supplies big boy commercial motorcycles.
Okay.
So
Yes, I mean, I'm happy to maybe see if I can maybe connect you up with the people at Michelin or kind of Bridgestone Goodyear and just say, look, this is what you guys are doing. You'd love to be able to work with them and kind of facilitate their kind of help them have some form of enterprise and supply development agreement. But if you could put together some kind of one pager that you can just give to a corporate to say, look, we are a black-owned business. We service this particular area. Women-led business. I mean, like, the things that a lot of people want to support. They want something that they can just say, this is a great one-pager that kind of that they can say, okay, I really like this project and I want to be able to go and put something behind it. So, I mean, I'm happy to also work with you and see if we can put something together. I can't make any promises. Obviously, everyone's looking for enterprise supply development opportunities. But if you start looking at the big businesses in your area as well, and just saying, how many of them are looking for ways to transform their suppliers? Are there logistics or courier companies, transport companies are going to be a very big one in the next year because I mean, I'm not going into too much detail, but long story short, the transport sector has had one set of BEE codes, which I think have been in place since about 2011. And these codes, most of the other sectors have issued new sectoral codes, but the transport sector hasn't. And one of the things that they have been that they expect is that they're going to drop quite sharply. So a lot of them are either sitting at level 2 or level 4 on their scorecard, and they're expecting quite big drops. So if you look around and see what other transport businesses that operate in your area, there might be a very easy opportunity for them. It's a mandatory, it's a legal requirement for them to make, it's a legal requirement if they want to get a BE certificate to be able to make these enterprise and supply development contributions. And it might be a nice, easy win for them and for you if you're able to go and position yourself in an attractive format.
okay,
So
I'll do
that's
that.
quite. Yeah, let's see what we can do. I'm sure we can come up with something fun there.
Okay.
The last one. Anyone else got any other questions there? I'm assuming that that's a no. The last one is obviously preferential procurement, and again, this is something where BE is quite an attractive lever to be able to go and work with. But the BE lever that you've got there is any organization that is under 10 million rand in annual turnover is what they call an exempt micro enterprise. And you can get a BE certificate irrespective of whether you are black, white, pink, or purple, that the bare minimum registers you as a level 4 BE contributor. That's a lot of people are actually quite surprised by that, but yes, you can get a BE certificate, a level 4 BE certificate, even if you are a white-owned business. What is quite important though is if you start doing business with, if you're a black-owned business, you can immediately get a level 2. There's a couple of things that you need to do to get yourself up to a level 1. But that BE certificate could be very powerful, and it's just an affidavit. You don't need to go through any form of verification process, and you can actually just go and get that stamped. And I mean, I think Ken even does. Ken will even give you a BE affidavit template or whatever and stamp it for you. But long story short, you can actually use this as a tool to be able to get business or make yourself more competitive over a different supplier. So again, when you look at the BEE scorecards, a lot of organizations are required to spend a certain amount with Black-owned businesses throughout their scorecard and small businesses. And using either your level 4, your level 2, your level 1, it can actually be a really powerful tool for you to be able to go and make yourself more competitive relative to an industry peer. So it's one of those things a lot of people forget, but being a small Black-owned business can actually be something that makes you a little bit more competitive than some of the industry peers. I'm not sure how many of you guys are actually employing staff at the moment. But one of the incentives that a lot of people forget about is the employment tax incentive. So the employment tax incentive says that if your organization employs staff that are under the age of 29 and earning less than 6,500, I think the updated number is, you can claim up to R1,000 back on this as a rebate on those staff. So it becomes quite a useful kind of mechanism for reducing your cost of employment. And my suggestion is, if you are looking and you are starting to scale up your staff and you've got a lot of entry-level staff, make sure you actually make use of this this incentive. It's one of those, it's part of your monthly return that you'll go and send through to SARS. It doesn't come as a cash return; it comes as a rebate that you work off against your PAYE, SAUIF. But it can make quite a big difference to your funding if your cash flow, if you're able to go and claim that rebate. Normally you get it back every 3 or 6 months as you're going along. You guys are in tech, so there's a lot of this time where in South Africa everyone's obviously pushing very hard to find out. We hear a lot of people talking about tech, but in terms of actual grants and incentives for the tech sector, they are quite limited. There is, and particularly straight up grants. I mean, there are some grants, sectoral grants, which kind of come up from time to time. But the Innovation Agency is actually a good place to go and start and to just get onto their mailing list. If you go to, and they've got a bunch of funding instruments that you can go and have a look at that may be applicable to your sector. So, for instance, they have, from time to time, they will open up a set of funding line or funding channel for the grassroots entrepreneurs in Tswane, for instance, and then they'll take applications, and it could be everything from 50,000 Rand all the way up to 350,000 Rand, and you can go and fund it. There are some more specific or technical grants if you are doing. I know at the moment they're doing quite a lot in the telephony space. The opportunity to go and build or build South African specific technology that you can go and that has some intellectual capital behind it. You can also go and look at that as a funding opportunity, but it's a nice place. I try and check in with them kind of once a week or once every 2 weeks just to see what is sitting on that program at the time and saying, is there anything here that could be suitable for my business? And as the different funds open up their different funding lines, you'll then be able to go and apply for funding there. Have any of you guys actually applied to or tried to apply via TIA? I'm assuming that's a no. Yeah, just do yourselves a favor. I mean, I think a lot of these things come up where you can go and have a look and see what grants and incentives are happening at the moment. But you need to go and actively be looking for them to see what is on the radar. Another one that I actually saw came up quite recently was the French Chamber of Commerce in South Africa is actually doing a drive for agri-tech type grants, and they run these programs for tech entrepreneurs in South Africa, and it's quite nice because they come with a whole lot of euros from overseas. If you want to follow that, I think it's called the French Chamber or the Francais Chamber, something on LinkedIn. If you go and have a look for them, I think we've shared them on some of the Facebook groups as well, some of the activities. But go and have a look at what TIA and the kind of foreign chambers of commerce and industry are doing. to be able to go and see if they've got any grants that you'll be able to go and access from foreign funders. I'll stop that for a moment because I just want to pull up another matrix for you here. Any questions or thoughts at the moment? I mean, obviously this is, there's various opportunities on the table, but I mean, what kind of is jumping out for you as entrepreneurs in terms of opportunities that you could look at? Jimmy, is everyone still on?
Yes, I think everyone is still on.
Oh, cool. I was wondering if I was just talking to myself.
No, I think if you can repeat the question, then yeah, perhaps you might get an answer.
Yeah, my question was really just whether there were any other questions that had come out from the team, and whether there were any thoughts or any other grants that I haven't touched on that you might maybe be interested in discussing.
No, like for me, I said it was the enterprise development stuff that stood out the most for me. So I'll just go do more research on that. But otherwise, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think there are people that are, that there are a number of different, I'm going to actually just post this into the chat as well. A lot of these larger DTIC grants are interesting, but, like I said, there's a lot of, the requirements for applying for a lot of these grants is quite strenuous. And some of them have been, quite heavily hit in terms of COVID. So there's, so for instance, DTIC has quite an attractive grant that they used to run, which was called the Export Marketing Incentive. And if you were a business that was operating in South Africa that had export potential, you could go to the DTIC and say, look, there is a exhibition happening in Germany that we really want to attend, and we believe that we can attend this and we can attract foreign investors into the business, or foreign investors to come and spend money with our business and put in foreign orders and bring foreign capital into South Africa. So that established that export marketing incentive. Obviously, with COVID, they've withdrawn a lot of that funding, but I suspect that will come back in the new year. But there was a cool story. There was a guy who was making these like glider planes, and they got a whole lot of orders out of India after one of these trade missions. So that became like a really nice success story to go and have a look at. You guys will be familiar with kind of the Section 12J. I don't know how closely you guys follow the venture capital industry, but I mean, there is this thing called Section 12J as well. Section 12J was established to try and encourage people, to encourage wealthy individuals and corporates to put money into the venture capital sector. And Section 12J effectively said that if you invest a certain amount of money, you get a very large tax benefit back. And the intent behind all these Section 12J funds was that they would invest in high growth, primarily technology businesses that did kind of morph into a lot of the tourism sector, etc. But for a lot of your businesses, I think you're too early stage to be able to look at taking Section 12J money at the moment. If there was some film and production, South Africa actually has quite a good film and production sector, but it doesn't necessarily have the size of audiences. So they've been putting quite a lot of incentives in place that you'll be able to go and look at. And if you just look in that document that I shared in the chat, it'll run you through some of the requirements there. Then there are kind of these more specific grants around, like the SPI grant, they call them SPI grants, SPI, and R&D grants. So if you are doing some kind of intellectual capital, intellectual property, which is believed to be South African intellectual property, because it's quite important. A lot of people try and externalize their IP, but there's a lot of opportunities to go and take the you can develop local intellectual property. So it could be a new method for new chemical methodology, for instance, or a new manufacturing process, and it was all developed in South Africa, and the IP was all sitting in South Africa. You could look at that through those SPI grants or the THRIP grants, and often what they say is they will only look for payback if you reach a certain amount of your revenue target or spend. So you basically have to make a certain amount of revenue before they would look at asking for a payback. There are some R&D grants which are quite complicated to apply for, but if you've got some very R&D intensive activities, they call them, it's Section 11D, it's a SARS incentive. And what you can do there is you can claim up to 150% of your spend on R&D back if you're building out some form of intellectual capital, intellectual property in South Africa, and you can actually measure it. But those processes require that you'll need engineers to prove that your technology is unique. It'll have to go through a whole tribunal with both SARS and the DTI or Treasury, and they will then say, yes, we agree that this is a project that we will fund and offer you the rebate. All the sectors are always coming up with new incentives. They're all trying to find different ways to incentivize people to actually produce and do innovative things inside their sectors. The key is you actually need to build up some of the knowledge about what is happening in your sector. I think probably if I were in your shoes and looking for something, an easier win, or at least a way to start a good discussion, I would focus it around the enterprise and supply development, because it is a more sustainable way. I mean, right up front, I did say that I was worried that people become they become intent or focused on trying to access grants and incentives, and that's the only way that they can grow their business. Clients will always be your cheapest form of funding, so have a look at the enterprise and supply development opportunities that are out there. And that's my spiel in a nutshell. Do you want to? Are there any other general questions you want to ask, or any other things you need to bounce off us? I'm going to take that as a no. Ken, anything else from your side?
No, we're good. I mean, it's informative. There's some links the guys can go on, and then they can ping Dumasani if they need any help, if they do find the right program.
Yeah.
What about those programs your friends are doing? Is it worth it? What's that? Zelenzi?
Oh, the Uzenzele ladies. So I mean, yeah. So there are a couple there. So I mean, the one is the Black Industrialist Grant. So Black Industrialist Grant is primarily looking to fund. They'll fund up to 50 million a year. But and I think this is why I hadn't included them right up front, was a lot of the Black Industrialist stuff requires industrialization. So in other words, building industrial capacity. It doesn't fund kind of OPEX, but rather it funds the manufacturing elements of it. And there's some quite high barrier, your barriers to entry. Your business needs to be quite well established. You need to be able to fund it. Timelines on a lot of those grants can run to 18 months from applying through to before the funds get dispersed. And a lot of them have quite stringent milestones to look at. But I think that, that does make an important point, and I know that we labor this sometimes, but if your accounting systems, your admin systems are not in place at the moment, you will end up in a situation where you'll see a grant or an incentive for your sector and suddenly realize that you're not even able to apply for it because you can't get tax clearance or whatever it is. And that's why I really do kind of urge you to kind of engage with Ken and see how you guys can make sure that your systems are in place so that when something does come up, you've got the opportunity to go and apply for it.
Yeah.
Cool. Alrighty. If there's no other questions, then I'm happy to knock off from there. And I'm happy to, as I say, if you guys want to drop me, I mean, we can't make any guarantees around